In this episode, we're going to focus on a defensive idea that sounds simple but has deep impact when it's done well: controlling what is allowed to run on endpoints. Many attacks succeed not because the attacker finds a rare technical flaw, but because they convince a device to execute something it should never have executed in the first place, like a malicious installer, a disguised document payload, or a script that quietly reaches out to download more tools. If you can control application execution, you can often stop whole categories of attacks early, before they establish persistence or spread. The challenge is that modern endpoints run lots of software. Scripts are used for legitimate automation, and attackers have become very skilled at hiding inside normal-looking execution paths. That's why today's focus includes allowlisting, script controls, and the bypass patterns attackers commonly use when they meet execution restrictions. The goal is not to memorize a list of tricks, but to understand the logic so you can reason about why certain controls work and how attackers try to route around them. A good starting point is to define what allowlisting really means and why it is different from the more familiar idea of blocking known bad items. Allowlisting is the practice of defining what is permitted to run and treating everything else as untrusted by default. That is a major mindset shift because traditional malware defenses often focus on denialisting, meaning they try to recognize and block known malicious files. Denialisting is useful, but it depends on knowing what is bad, and attackers constantly change file names, packaging, and delivery methods to avoid recognition. Allowlisting flips the problem by focusing on what is known and approved, which reduces the attacker's ability to introduce new tools. The reason this is powerful is that an attacker's first goal is often to execute code, and if the device refuses to run anything outside approved boundaries, many attacks fail quickly. For beginners, it helps to think of allowlisting as a nightclub guest list. If you're not on the list, you don't get in, even if you look harmless. That strictness is why allowlisting can be so effective, but it's also why it requires thoughtful planning. Allowlisting works best when you connect it to baselines and endpoint roles, because the set of approved applications for a workstation is different from the set for a server. A baseline defines what should exist on a system, and allowlisting enforces that expectation by preventing random additions. On a workstation, you might allow common productivity tools, browsers, and approved business applications, while blocking unknown installers and unapproved utilities. On a server, the allowed set can often be even smaller, which makes allowlisting more feasible and more effective. The operational challenge is that work changes, new applications are introduced, and legitimate updates occur, so allowlisting must be maintained. When it's maintained well, it reduces both risk and chaos, because software sprawl is constrained. When it's maintained poorly, it either blocks legitimate work constantly or it becomes so permissive that it loses value. So controlling execution with confidence means treating allowlisting as an ongoing program tied to baselines, not as a one-time switch you flip. Script controls are a closely related category because scripts are one of the most common execution paths used in both legitimate administration and malicious activity. Scripts are attractive to attackers because they can be lightweight, easily modified, and often run through trusted interpreters that are already present on systems. Many environments rely on scripts for automation, maintenance, and user tasks, which means defenders can't simply ban scripts without breaking legitimate operations. Script controls aim to reduce risk by limiting which scripts can run, how they can run, and under what circumstances they can access sensitive resources or launch other programs. For beginners, the simplest concept is that scripts are code, and code needs governance, even if it's written in a language that looks like plain text. If you treat scripts as harmless text files, you give attackers a stealthy execution channel. If you treat scripts as controlled software, you can keep automation while reducing abuse. A key part of script control is recognizing that the interpreter is often the true execution engine. When a script runs, the endpoint is really running the interpreter program, and the script is the instructions fed into it. Attackers exploit this by hiding malicious instructions inside scripts that appear benign or by using built-in scripting engines to execute commands without dropping obvious executable files. This is why allowlisting alone may not be enough if it only approves the interpreter, because the attacker can still run arbitrary code through an approved interpreter. Effective script control, therefore, includes restrictions on which scripts are permitted, where scripts can be launched from, and whether scripts must meet certain trust conditions before running. It also includes visibility, meaning you want logs that show script execution events and the chain of processes involved. From a beginner standpoint, the takeaway is that approving a tool is not the same as approving how the tool is used. Script controls aim to constrain usage patterns, not just file names. Now let's address bypass patterns, because attackers are creative and will look for alternate execution routes when their preferred path is blocked. One common bypass pattern is to use trusted locations and trusted processes. If execution controls trust software installed in certain directories, attackers try to place their files there by abusing permissions or by leveraging legitimate installers. If controls trust software signed by certain publishers, attackers may attempt to use signed but vulnerable programs in unintended ways. Another bypass pattern is to use legitimate tools that are already allowed, such as built-in utilities, to perform actions that mimic malware, like downloading content, extracting archives, or launching other processes. This is not always because the attacker wants to be fancy. It's because using allowed tools can blend into normal activity and can slip past simplistic allowlisting. The important concept is that bypass is often about using what is already trusted rather than introducing something obviously new. That's why execution control must consider behavior in context, not only static lists. Another bypass pattern involves using file types and execution mechanisms that defenders forget to govern. Beginners often think of execution as double-clicking an application file, but endpoints can execute code through many routes, including documents with embedded code, shortcuts that call other programs, and scripts that launch interpreters. Attackers look for the route that is least controlled, especially in environments where allowlisting is incomplete. This is why controlling application execution requires a broad view of what counts as code and what counts as launch. If you block unknown executables but allow untrusted scripts, you haven't really controlled execution, you've only shifted the attacker's choice of tool. Similarly, if you control scripts but allow untrusted installers, the attacker may use an installer-based path instead. A mature approach tries to close the obvious alternate routes and then relies on detection and response for the rare, complex bypass attempts. The goal is to make execution restrictions robust enough that attackers cannot trivially pivot to a different path. It's also important to understand that allowlisting and script controls can create false confidence if they are deployed without attention to privilege and policy consistency. If users have administrative rights, they may be able to disable controls or install software in trusted locations, and attackers who compromise those users inherit that power. If policies are inconsistent across endpoints, attackers can target the weakest devices because they often only need one foothold. This is why execution control is tied to privilege management and configuration integrity, because the controls must be enforceable and resistant to tampering. It's also why central management matters, because controls that can be altered locally are more vulnerable. For beginners, it's enough to see that execution control is not only a technical feature, it is a governance system. The control must be consistent, protected, and monitored, or it becomes a fragile barrier that attackers can knock down. Execution control also has a human reality. People will try to get their work done, and if controls block legitimate needs frequently, workarounds will appear. Those workarounds can become shadow IT pathways, such as using personal devices, unauthorized cloud services, or unsanctioned remote tools. That means the best execution control programs include a safe and fast process for approving legitimate software and scripts, so users are not forced into risky choices. It also means having clear communication about what is allowed and why, so the controls feel like a safety system rather than arbitrary friction. The more your allowlisting aligns with real job roles and business needs, the less resistance you face and the less likely people are to circumvent controls. This is one reason baselines matter so much, because they define a stable, expected environment that supports work while limiting randomness. When controls match reality, they become sustainable, and sustainability is what keeps security benefits alive over time. From a detection perspective, execution control adds value even when it does not block every attempt, because bypass attempts often create signals. If a device repeatedly tries to run blocked programs, that suggests either user behavior that needs correction or attacker probing. If scripts are being launched in unusual patterns or from unusual locations, that can be a strong indicator of compromise. A good visibility program will log these events and correlate them with other signals like authentication anomalies or suspicious outbound connections. This is another example of layered defense. You control what you can, you detect what you can't fully control, and you design the system so that violations are visible. Attackers prefer silent freedom, so making execution attempts visible and constrained is a strategic advantage. Even when an attacker succeeds in bypassing controls, the effort to do so may increase their footprint, creating more opportunities for detection. This is why execution controls are both preventive and detective in effect. As we wrap up, remember the core idea. Controlling application execution is about reducing the attacker's ability to run code, which is often the critical turning point in an intrusion. Allowlisting defines what is permitted and treats everything else as untrusted by default, which can stop many attacks that rely on introducing new tools. Script controls recognize that interpreters and automation are powerful execution channels, so they govern not just which tools are present, but how scripts are allowed to run and under what conditions. Attackers respond with bypass patterns that lean on trusted tools, trusted locations, and overlooked execution routes, which is why execution control must be layered, consistent, and paired with good logging and privilege discipline. When these controls are designed with real workflows in mind, they reduce risk without forcing constant workarounds, and they make attacks harder, noisier, and easier to contain. That is what it means to control execution in a way that supports security and operations at the same time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.